Please stand for the singing of the national anthem. And the Council for the City of Peterborough recognizes the principles contained in our Constitution and the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. All right, everyone. Madam Clerk, any disclosure of pecuniary interest this evening?
Mr. Chair, I'm not aware of any at this time.
All right, we'll move to our consent agenda. Committee members, let me know if you'd like to speak to any of the following items. 9A, Debt Management and Capital Financing Plan. Anyone wishing to speak to that? Mayor Leal. 9B, Budget Amendment and Award of King Street Parkade Elevator Replacement. Anyone wishing to speak to that? Councillor Yao. 9C, Peterborough Architectural Conservation Advisory Committee appointment. Anyone wishing to speak to that? Seeing none. All right, so up for consent this evening, 9C. If I can have a mover for my 9C, Councillor Vasiliadis, and we'll take a vote. And that is carried. Thanks, everyone. So we do have one presentation this evening, 8A, City of Peterborough Holdings, Inc. 2022 Annual Report. And I'm pleased that we have Ms. Brown Addison here this evening and Mr. Stevenson. So you're both welcome to come up if you'd like. Certainly so. Welcome to both of you. Thank you.
Well, good evening, Council, and thank you very much for receiving us this evening. We're here to give you a brief highlight of the fiscal 2022 City of Peterborough Holdings, Inc. Annual Report. I believe you all received a copy of that. It was distributed to Council at the end of June. For the public, the full report is available on our website, so I would direct you there. Tonight, though, I know you have a very busy agenda, so Nancy and I will be brief, just pointing out some of the highlights for the organization for the year. Oh. Excuse me for 1 second, I'll get used to the controls. All right, so fiscal 2022 highlights. We start with safety performance. It is near and dear to our hearts. It is our #1 objective in the organization. It's something that, as many of you are aware of, that served on our board. We start with safety as our motto, and it's something that we try to achieve high performance in, not only for ourselves, for our employees, but for the public. So I'm pleased to report that last year we achieved a milestone of more than 8 years and 2.5 million hours without a lost time injury. We're very proud of across our organization. On another note, our water quality, there's been no issues there, and our systems, our quality systems have been externally validated. with 100% compliance. So when I speak to public safety, we're pointing more to water quality and the water performance than we are for the generation results. Although we take our generation facilities and obviously the safety around them very seriously as well. So a good result last year on safety performance. Operational performance, one of our highest operational thresholds was achieved last year. Our plant uptime exceeded not only our targets, but our historical average. And what I mean by that is our facilities, our generation facilities need to be up and running despite what the weather is. And our performance metric is greater than 97% uptime for all our facilities last year. So that's a testament to the crews that work there and obviously the risk management and the operational performance of those facilities. So we're very proud of that. Environmental performance, as you know, we're in the renewable generation business. Our fleet is renewable generation. We are now at a point where almost 50% of our output from our renewable generation facilities produce an equivalent that would service 50% of our residential customers. This is more of a metric than as opposed to what we actually do. As you know, our energy output goes into the provincial grid, but it gives you a sense of the sizing of the facilities and what we actually produce for renewable performance. Financial performance, we were ahead of target. We were ahead of last year. Net income was 5.8 million, slightly above the prior year at 5.6 million. Then from that, of course, the distributions to the city included a regular annual distribution of 5.3 million. And as you're all aware, at the end of the year, we provided an additional $1.8 million special distribution. Total distribution is 7.1 million. In fact, exceeded our earnings last year, but we're very pleased to try to help you achieve your objectives as well. So all in all, I think that we had a very good year. Just to put some context for people that don't know, our total generation capacity has grown obviously over the years with investment. We stand at about just short of 50 megawatts in terms of installed capacity, renewable generation capacity. The red is our hydro, the green is our solar, and you can see our investments in that have increased quite a bit. Flatlined a little bit in the last couple of years due to provincial policy, but I think that things are moving forward and we're turning a corner going forward. So a fairly large renewable generation portfolio. I would say probably second in Ontario from a municipal standpoint, possibly third at this point. So we're very proud of that as well. And that really is the engine that is producing right now the returns that we've spoken to. At the bottom is the traditional graph that we've given over the years that shows the red line is the tracking of our annual distributions to the city, and the blue is the cumulative distributions over time to the city. As I mentioned to you, last year was 7.1 million, but we've been drifting upwards into the $5.5 million regular annual contribution from our existing generation capacity. And of course, over the years, that's achieved greater than $100 million of distributions from the organization over the years. Okay, I'm going to shift gears just a little bit because I'm sure that was the past and you're wondering about what's happening going forward. Okay. Many of you have probably seen the recently issued Ontario Government Powering Ontario's Growth document, quite a comprehensive document that's speaking to the need to ensure that we meet electricity demand going forward. You'll note that in that report, I think for the first time since 2005, demand is starting to outstrip supply. We're bringing Pickering offline. Business is starting to use more energy. And the great swing item here, of course, is the electrification of the economy moving forward that all countries are trying to achieve, being very much cognizant of a clean electricity portfolio. So this is a challenge going forward, and the Ontario government recognizes that, and we applaud them for doing that. The Independent Electricity System Operator has completed a study that basically says, to meet the capacity going forward, driven by electrification and some of these fundamental changes, that you need to double, basically the province needs to double its generation capacity, which is a very tall challenge for any province or country. And also noting that much of the existing fleet either needs to be refurbished or will come offline. So there's a double-pronged impact on how we move forward. everybody is recognizing that climate change is a major issue. And the only way that we get there is by the electrification and cleaning of the economy. And to do that requires substantial investment in our existing Ontario fleet, in the renewable energy sector, and bringing in new technologies that you've obviously read about, battery storage and some other things. So presently, the IESO, the Independent Electricity System Operator, has issued some competitive initiatives for 4,000 megawatts, particularly pointed at some of these new technologies, battery energy storage. And I will tell you that we are presently very much in the mix of that at Kofi. It aligns with what we've done in the past and what we're trying to do going forward. So we are right now working with strategic partners, with trying to deal with Indigenous content, as well as looking at the overall readiness that needs to be achieved to submit a competitive submission to the provincial government, which I expect to be much later this year. Their timeline tends to move a little bit, but I will say that we very much are engaged in doing that. At some point when we've advanced those commercial and strategic development initiatives, we'll be in a better position to come to talk to you about where that aligns. But right now, I think that we're still very much in the early formative stages, but we do have some sites very much in mind that we have control of, that we think that will be very much a good fit for this competitive process going forward. So lots of opportunity provincially. We welcome that. Lots of change for everybody, whether it's consumers or those in the energy industry, and much more to come as the province tries to achieve what I would characterize as a very large change in the way that energy policy needs to move going forward in the next 10 to 20 years. Energy policy, you can't decide what you're going to do on Monday and make it happen on Tuesday, as you know. These are long lead policy objectives that require investment and well thought after execution to make them not only beneficial to what we do, which are returns to you, but make them make sense to consumers and the overall objectives of the provincial government. So we look forward to coming back and talking to you about that when we're ready. Nancy, any comments at this point? I just open it up now to your questions. I know you have a very busy evening.
Great, thank you both of you, and thanks, Sean, for that update. Appreciate it. So we do have some questions. Mayor Leal and then Councillor Real. Mayor Leal.
Thanks very much, Chair Beamer. First of all, to Chair Nancy and John, on behalf of the citizens of Peterborough, I want to thank you and the men and women that work with you each and every day for what really is a fine public utility in the province of Ontario and indeed throughout Canada. I know for certain your predecessors, Bob Lake, Larry Doran, yourself, all had very distinguished reputations in this field throughout the nation, and it bodes well for the future. My question, through you, Mr. Chair, to John. John, you referenced an Ontario government framework document that's come out, but within the last week, the Government of Canada has also brought out a framework agreement, the Clean Grid Imperative by 2035. Through you, Mr. Chair. John, what opportunities or additional opportunities do you see through that particular framework document?
Well, thank you for mentioning that. I haven't read that in great detail, but I definitely welcome that. I think that this is such a challenging change that has to occur across the country and the province for electricity, the way we use it, and particularly the climate change impacts. That it's a combined effort, which requires federal policy as well, not just provincial policy. Requires a unified mindset to deal with that. If you just look, for instance, at EV infrastructure required to get to electric vehicles, it's not just about the great initiatives that the province has done in terms of manufacturing that's going to move that along, but you need to have the infrastructure for consumers to actually use, and you need to have the price point to actually be able to use these things. And that is only going to happen when you have federal policy as well as provincial policy driving the bus. With respect to what I think that they put out, my sense is that's pretty much probably at the transmission and the larger grid area to make sure that electricity is in the right place to enable what has to trickle down through provincial and local areas for achieving all the objectives for clean, green electricity supply.
I have one more question, Chair Beamer, through you to John. A particular interest of mine is battery storage. Perhaps you can shed some light on potential opportunities in that area.
Certainly, it is something that is front and center, and it's something that we're actually working on right now. It is the flavor of much of what I think the 4,000 megawatts that the IESO is putting out in terms of their competitive proposal context that I just alluded to. Obviously, it's been advanced very much further in some other provinces, such as Alberta, with great success. And I think Ontario is looking at, through this process, at many sites to qualify for battery energy storage. Much of that is at the large scale side related to transmission. This isn't small stuff that is just sort of put in a parking lot or at the university, something what we would be used to. They're a little bit larger scale to ensure that you can achieve the efficiencies and the returns that are necessary. But we're very excited about that opportunity, and we think that definitely we have great prospects in that envelope.
One last question, Mr. Chair, through John. John, the province of Alberta within the last week announced that they're putting a moratorium on for a period of time for renewable energy projects. Does that possibly shift the opportunities, maybe looking at Ontario to widen the renewable generation portfolio?
Well, definitely it's becoming more of a countrywide competitive process. I can tell you right now, and what we just talked about in the battery energy storage potential in Ontario, that there are many large companies from Alberta that are qualified for site-specific opportunities here. And that it's public knowledge from Capital Power to a lot of other large players in Alberta. So I think we're getting to the point where it's not bound just by provincial jurisdiction anymore. Private entities are looking for the ability to put this technology in and to activate it, actualize it in great environments whatever province it's in.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Nancy. Thanks, John.
Thank you, Mayor Leo, for that. Councillor Reel?
Through the chair to John and Nancy, thank you very much for being here. As a former board member of Kofi, it's great to see you. As a former chair of finance, and my vice chair was beside me at that time, great news when the dividend came in, and then all of a sudden we were given another $1.8 million. I guess my question, can we look forward to that enhanced dividend for this time as we're building a budget instead of the 5.2 to $7 million? And we certainly would be look forward to that news. So anything on that front?
Well, I will say that getting to that level sounds simpler than it is, as you realize. It obviously is greater than our earnings capability. So we're really moving backwards in doing that. In this year, we are having a good year, so that always helps. I will say last year, the forecast of where we thought we were land for the year, which was also a good year, helped us to sort of make that decision. But I don't really want to speak for the board. I think the board has a fiduciary obligation, as you know, to balance all of these levers, shareholder interest versus their fiduciary obligation to the corporation. So I think that it's a little bit early to definitely be saying that there's anything about the annual dividend, and I think we'd have to look at that carefully. But we are very much sensitive to the budget pressures that the city's going through. So that will be measured, and we'll advise you when we get to that point.
To the chair, John, with the government looking like they're going to get back into renewable energy or microfit or whatever, have you approached the city about some roof mounts? We're building a brand new arena. Don't know what the square footage is, but have you had any conversations about a roof mount on that building or some of the other buildings we have in the city of Peterborough to try and enhance the solar part of the business?
We haven't, but part of that is being driven a little bit by the available opportunity for contracts and pricing. So, we have a lot of, rooftop facilities that do very well in that total solar portfolio, as well as our ground mounts. But all of those are behind a contract that at some point made those things economic. Right now, the province hasn't moved too far forward with respect to providing a contract that would enable the capital investment for you to do that, even though it makes entire sense to do that, and it makes entire sense for us to find every roof envelope in the city proper to maximize, economics and efficiency and energy. We do need a little bit of contract behind that to make it actually work. If you're doing it at the spot market right now, it's just not going to work. Headwinds, it's moving in the right direction. I would say on the water side, there's been a lot of lobbying with respect to what needs to happen on the water power side. So things aren't just solely focused on new technologies and battery storage, but there's some grounds that still has to be gained at the provincial level as they try to manage their fiscal objectives as well, right? So they're not letting out too many contracts because they have their own fiscal pressures. So I think when the climate becomes better for that, we certainly would be connecting with our city brethren here moving forward.
I might just add that John Winsma, who is, you all know, is our lead on all of the operations, is very engaged in a number of the associations and committees at the provincial level. So he's staying very connected and very aware so that we can be well aware and prepared for opportunities coming down the road. So John's investing a lot of time in getting us as much information and insight as possible.
Thank you very much for being here tonight. It's always a pleasure for your presentations. We'll certainly, when we get a dividend like this here, it certainly helps our bottom line. We're putting a budget together, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Real. Councillor LaChica.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, to John and Nancy. I just wanted to say thank you for this very compelling report. It's heartening, and it encourages so much of the directions we need to take in partnership as our city of Peterborough in our responsiveness to the climate emergency. It really just stood out to me, the priorities, the green-centric focus, and just transitions, and all the ways within your infrastructure that you're making that happen. I had the pleasure of being at the Children's Water Festival and got to meet you, John, and I'm just so impressed by the education focus and just things around research with Trent and water conservation. All of it is very intergenerational and very effective. So we thank you for being leaders with us, and we will tackle this climate emergency with the urgency it deserves. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor LaChica. Any further comments or questions? Or just questions right now? Any further questions? John, Nancy, thank you to both of you, and thanks for all your hard work.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. All right, so recommendations in front of us, moved by Mayor Leal. Any comments or questions? Moved by Mayor Leal, we'll take a vote. And that is carried. Thank you, everyone. So 9A, Debt Management and Capital Financing Plan, Mayor Leal and Councillor Real. Mayor Leal.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. First of all, I support this recommendation. The other thing is we do have, even though we want to be prudent, we want to be absolutely prudent from a fiscal perspective, but we do have some debt capacity in the city of Peterborough that I think it's time that we utilized some of this capacity to do some of the big projects that have been sitting on the books for far too long. I've said in previous discussions that the Brayley Drive expansion north of Lansdowne Street up to Park Hill Road is an important project that needs to be looked at and financed and moved ahead on because that's a project that benefits everyone in the city of Peterborough. The other companion project, of course, that we need to look debt financing on is the improvements that are needed, desperately needed on Chemong Road. Again, a major arterial road project that has been sitting on the books again, far too long. I think we have a responsibility not to just keep kicking these projects down the road, and then they never get completed, they never get accomplished. And we look at the moving the debt capacity from 16.5% to 20, which is an increase of 3.5%. When you compare that to the inflation index in the construction industry today, that's moving continuously on a double-digit increase every year that we kick these projects down the road, the cost is becoming compounded. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to stress that point, compounded in terms of the absolute cost of getting that done. A good example of what's happening out there is last Friday, I had the opportunity to be at the Eastern Ontario Mayor's Caucus meeting in Trenton, Ontario. And many of the mayors, my peers, were talking about the fact is now that many of the major construction projects that they're doing in their respective communities, there's only one bidder. And those bids are significantly higher than what the estimates are within their municipal folks that do the analysis to look at these things. So it's time to get moving. It's time to get this approved, and it's time to get these big projects finished in the city of Peterborough, where every one of our citizens will receive benefit from making these investments.
Thank you very much, Mayor Leal. Any comments, Councillor Real?
Through the chair to Mr. Freeman, certainly I have to agree with or echo what the mayor just said. But if we do move the needle from what we're doing to increase that, with the interest and inflation on the operation side, are we basically just chasing our tail, trying to do these projects? Any comments on that?
Mr. Chairman, as his worship alluded to in his comments, to the what's happening in the capital cost in the construction industry, I just went back here in the last few moments and found, what we were given as part of at the late in 2022 in terms of the construction indexing inflationary rate, and at the third quarter of 2022. It was 15.6%. And so when we consider, what's happening with construction out there, and we're amazed at the price and the cost, that's what we're seeing. And then I went back the year before at the same, back in, late 2021. Well, what was it then? Well, it was 11.6%. So, Mr. Chairman, his worship is right on, and I appreciate the councillor's comments here. We've got to get moving here on some of these projects, and to sit and try and tuck the money aside and pay as you go. As much as I'm right there too, it takes a balance, but I'm fearful that we'll not be able to set the monies aside fast enough to outpace inflation. So I'm bringing forward the recommendation here that we've got to increase our financing capacity and move forward here with the work. Thank you.
Through the chair to Mr. Freeman, as we move the needle and we move that number up, certainly for the necessity that we're trying to do, is there also, and I don't have a laundry list here, I know it's going to surprise you, but are you looking at efficiencies too? Just all right to arbitrarily increase that number and that money, but have you been looking at what efficiencies on our side of the fence that we can do to clean up our side going forward? Just not throwing money at it and doing the same old. Are we actually looking for efficiencies with inside our business that this makes sense?
Mr. Chairman, the answer is absolutely. And Mr. Reyna is our new CAO. He's all over that. And I can attest to that through his leadership here just recently. He's made a number of organizational changes. I think that we will realize some of these efficiencies. So I know that there's more news to come on that front, but we are very keen to do whatever we can to operate efficiently.
Through the chair to Mr. Freeman, have we looked at issuing, and I might not have this right, but bonds or shares in the city of Peterborough? Are we allowed to do that? And have we ever looked at doing that? Bonds for people out there with an interest rate that's that somebody might buy into?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, Mr. Chairman. You know, it reminds me of way back when I first come to the city of Peterborough. And of course, we did a debt issue and we carved out a couple $100,000 and we sold it over the counter to the councillor's point. That's not a very efficient process. So it's much quicker, more efficient to go to Infrastructure Ontario, and Infrastructure Ontario, because it's a crown, bit of a crown corporation. We have very favorable interest rates. So to be quite frank with you, Councillor, the citizens of Peterborough would be better off to go to their financial institution and allow the city of Peterborough to go to Infrastructure Ontario, because we can leverage the more attractive rates through that crown corporation. So I can borrow monies right now today through Infrastructure Ontario for 30 years at about 4.5%. I'm generalizing. But the citizens of Peterborough would want a lot more than 4.5% if you're prudent with your money right now for 30 years. So anyway, just saying.
Thank you, Councillor Reel. I have Councillor Purnell, Crowley, and Baldwin. Councillor Purnell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to go to page 4 of the report, table 1. We're missing one of the capital pre-commitments for 2024, and that is the Lansdowne Street West from Clonsilla to Spilsbury. That has been pre-approved by council twice. And so that number needs to be in there. My understanding is 2024, we're continuing with property acquisition and utility relocates, with the final turning lane being done in 2025, but we'll still need some funds in 2024 to keep that project moving ahead, because it has been council approved and pre-approved twice.
Mr. Freeman, I do believe it was pre-approved last year. Is that, should that be in the table, or?
Mr. Chairman, I'm certainly happy to go back and I'll work with Mr. Nelson here in front of me to make sure that we have that. If it is pre-committed, I do remember the conversation as well. Councillor, if it should be on the list, we'll make sure it's on the list and included in the 2024 budget. So that's on me on that one.
Yeah, it might have been 2 budgets ago, because I think Miss Fletcher was still here.
Well, we pre-approved it in 2016.
Yep.
To be finished by 2020, and it didn't happen.
Yeah.
And then I think it was 2020 that
2 years ago. Yeah.
that we pre-approved it again, and it was supposed to be done by 2024. Now it's been pushed out by 1 year, 2025, but it's all pre-approved and council pre-approved in the budget.
Mr. Freeman, just in the next 2 weeks, would we council be able to receive an email on that?
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
We'll circle back to council with an email.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Purnell. Councillor Crowley.
Good evening, Chair. Thank you very much. Just to piggyback off of Councillor Reel's questions, in what sort of, this is for Commissioner Friedman, what sort of economic environment are we going to be able to reduce that debt load from 20% back down, or will it remain at 20% in perpetuity, and that would just be available to us if we need it in the future? Does that make sense?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the question. To the Councillor Crowley, there's 2 things happening here that you're alluding to. This report is establishing the threshold or the capacity. It's up to council, though, through subsequent budget approvals and capital budget approvals, either through the budget process or through a specific report to council about how we use that capacity up. So what you're referring to is how quickly are we going to use it? And that really is a further council decision consideration when you're approving the capital budget.
That's perfect. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Now, sorry, one more question,
Yeah,
Mr. Chair, through you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Freeman, so we have a AA+ rating, I believe, is what the report said. What would we need to do as a city in order to get a higher rating? And would potentially carrying more debt affect the ability for us to get a higher rating?
Mr. Chairman, I believe that, and I apologize, it just cut out. I didn't quite hear the question, but I believe it was referring to the city's credit rating that is established by Standard and Poor's, and that's the city enjoys a AA+ credit rating. To increase that would be a AAA. That's AAA is the highest rating that would be offered any municipality, regardless of who you are in Ontario. There are very few municipalities that would have a AAA credit rating, but one of the key requirements would be a fairly deep assessment base. So think of like a city of Mississauga, for instance, may enjoy a AAA credit rating. So, Mr. Chairman, will the city of Peterborough be able to increase their credit rating? We will certainly do everything we can to continue to enjoy a good, robust credit rating. Will it ever be a AAA rating? Probably not. We just do not have the depth to be able to do that. It's out of our hands. I mean, that determination is made by Standard and Poor's through their evaluation.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Freeman.
Thank you very much, Councillor Crowley. And again, Councillor Crowley and Councillor Burke are both joining us virtually. Councillor Baldwin.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I 100% agree with Mayor Leal's comments with respect to getting some projects completed. He threw out two, Brayley Drive and Shimong Road, but there's a laundry list here. I can come up with several. The 4-laning of Television Road, all of the east side transportation perspective improvements with the new 700 housing development going in on Liftlock Golfland. We need a tremendous amount of infrastructure going in there to support that. Smaller, I hope we don't lose sight of some smaller initiatives that need to be done. The 100th Street East, going from the new Kawadi School to the National Monument, that roadway going down to the lift lock is atrocious. George Street is atrocious. Water Street, terrible. Charlotte Street, you've been on there lately. Locke Street, and I can't forget Mariah Street. We have a tremendous amount, and that's just me off the top of my head. So I'm going to be very, very interested in how Mr. Nelson and his team make those recommendations to council. But unless we increase our debt capacity, we're not going to have a chance to do that, certainly in the lifetime of this council and probably the next 2 or 3. So certainly supportive of the recommendations, and those would be my comments, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those comments, Councillor Baldwin. Any further comments or questions on the recommendation in front of us? Councillor Duguay.
Thank you, Chair Beamer. I also share and support Mayor Leal's comment with respect to the necessity for us to consider increasing our debt capacity so that we can tackle projects. Councillor Baldwin, I think we went around the room. We could probably identify many roads. It's not just roads. There are other matters that this municipality must attend to as we're embracing for considerable growth. I have a question, Mr. Freeman. To the rest of staff, perhaps next week we can place you all in hot seats. But I'm considering the chart that my colleague, Councillor Purnell, referenced table 1, page 4, and I appreciate she did reference the Lansdowne Street. My understanding, a lot of these projects that are pre-committed for 2024, many of them end in 2024. Am I correct? And assuming, for example, Curtis Creek, that's winding down, the traffic signals, Cherry Hill winding down, perhaps the Canoe Museum, some of that. Are we completed in 2024, or will these continue beyond that fiscal year?
Mr. Chairman, I'll invite Mr. Nelson if he wants to make any additional comments. Some of them very well might be winding down, but your reference to the Canoe Museum, if you will recall, and well, maybe you won't actually, it was the previous term of council that approved the financing of the city's capital contribution over 8 years. So it was actually $500,000 over 8 years. So although the museum will be, operational and functioning in every sense of the word, the city's financial commitment will extend for a period of time. So this solidified our financial commitment to them, but allowed us to cash flow it over an 8-year period.
And if I could, to that point on this, and before Mr. Nelson chimes in, it would be helpful for my benefit if perhaps we have another column that indicates the length of our commitment. Because when initially read, I'm assuming it might be concluding in 2024. I'd like to know some of the end dates, if that would be very helpful for decision-making purposes. Thank you. Or projected end dates. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Duguay. Any further comments or questions? All right, good discussion this evening. Moved by Mayor Leal. We'll take a vote.
Oh, sorry, I had my hand up.
Oh, sorry, Councillor. Sorry, apologies, Councillor Burke. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Just a quick question through you, Chair Beamer, to staff, maybe Mr. Friedman. My comments are revolving around the part of the conversation where we talked about efficiencies and where we talked about the escalating cost of construction. So my question for staff would be, how have we revisited our tendering process for these projects that we're taking on since these costs have gone up?
Mr. Chairman, and I'll invite Mr. Nelson if he wants to supplement my comments. Each year at the end of the term of council, there is a procurement framework, a procurement bylaw that is passed by each term of council that sets the stage for the procurement framework in the next term of council. It received quite an overhaul, actually. Fairly recently, and whereby all of the bid process use standard templates, and we have a fairly robust, efficient system. And in addition to that, I know that staff have also reviewed our capacity to deliver the projects, and I know that they have worked with both the previous and current CAO to ensure that we have the staffing capacity to actually deliver. So with that, I'll invite Mr. Nelson if he wants to add some additional comments.
Thank you. Through the chair, Councillor Burke, we continue to use the invitation to tender template and format. As you're aware, the invitation to tender typically is on the basis that the low bid receives the work. So unfortunately, that isn't necessarily always, well, it's the low bid that receives the work. We've been fortunate, especially even this year. Mayor Leal commented about some municipalities struggling and being challenged in only receiving one bid. We were the benefactors of seeing at minimum at least two bidders, and in some cases we had many bidders on the projects that we closed this year, albeit we did see escalated prices, and that's more so from just the economic times and the escalation in construction costs and similar impacts through the pandemic and various other factors that are impacting costs of the construction world that we're currently seeing. So again, we're doing our best to continue to do more with less. But unfortunately, that's the economic times that we're currently seeing, and that we've seen escalations, and constantly trying to determine and figure out ways of improving on methods of construction, alternate materials. Again, going trenchless versus actually digging things. But unfortunately, sometimes when our infrastructure gets to the point that it's at, there is no other option short of digging and replacing. But again, as I indicated, various methods of trying to save monies and do things more cost effective is currently and constantly on staff's minds to try and find more innovative ways of saving money.
Thanks. And then just a follow-up question, as a counselor, I'm the one on the front lines of receiving the feedback after these projects are done. Companies have left barrier film in sewers, or they didn't clean up this or that, or they didn't do this right. So through those experiences, my question would be do we have an internal way within the city of assessing, you know, and grading how these projects are done?
Through the chair, we do, Councillor Burke. We do have city staff that are assigned when we're delivering projects, basically utilizing city staff. We have on-site inspectors that are inspecting and contract administrating those projects. Unfortunately, those inspectors, staff resources are a problem. Those inspectors do have multiple projects, so unfortunately, they can't be on site all the time. We do have quality control and quality assurance methods in place to capture 99% of those issues, things like CCTV works of sewers following construction to ensure that there's a sound product and no damage, no dirt and debris in those sewers following construction. Again, as I say, 99.9%, but I can't sit here and guarantee that everything is captured 100% of the time. But staff do an extremely good job in ensuring that a quality product is received by the taxpayers of the city of Peterborough.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Nelson.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Burke. Any further comments or questions? Seeing none, we'll move by Mayor Leal. We'll take a vote. That is carried. Last item of the evening, 9B, budget amendment for King Street Parkade elevator replacement. Councillor Riel.
Through the chair to Mr. Freeman, an unfair question. How much money are we making off these parking garages?
Mr. Chairman, I might have to circle back to council. I know that each of the garages, I do believe, turn a net profit, but I would have to follow up with council in an email. Happy to do that, or perhaps it's more appropriate. The question could be answered on Wednesday night during the staff presentation.
I think it might have been more fair. I mean, I'm looking at this here. We're debenturing money to pay for a repair on the King Street or the King Street. So is there not a reserve? I'm thinking that both Simcoe Street and King Street are probably 20 years old. There should be a reserve there. I know that we're taking part of, I guess, a reserve from the Simcoe Street. We've already refurbished Simcoe Street, and now we're on King Street, so we know that there is going to be some failure or some work that needs to be done. But here we are going to debenture money to pay for the repair of this here, as opposed to the collection of how much money we're bringing in for parking fees.
Mr. Chairman, I would love to say to council that there's reserve money set aside that we wouldn't have to borrow the funds, but that's just not the case. And we just operate a way more lean than that. And any surplus that those parking garages make typically during the year would go back in to offset the tax rates in the subsequent years.
To the chair, Mr. Freeman, I'm surprised that there isn't a reserve fund, because that's something that I keep pounding on, that there isn't a reserve fund of that. But thank you very much for that information. But I think that that's something going forward. These parking garages and parking things are going to fail. There needs a replacement. I don't know. I forget what it cost us for Simcoe Street, but it was in the millions and millions of dollars to refurbish it. So just a question, and I'll move the report.
Thank you very much, Councillor Riel. Moved by Councillor Riel. Councillor Degay.
Thank you, Chair Beamer. To Mr. Freeman, the two-part question, the proposed elevator improvements, it will ensure there's accessibility is achieved in the elevator facilities, yes?
Through the chair, if I may answer that, yes. One elevator will be done at each time, so one elevator is always in service during construction.
Thank you. And I have a second question. As our downtown is expanding in a more southerly direction, is there a possibility that King Street could accommodate additional floors for parking purposes. Because we're contemplating changing our elevator and we need additional parking. Is it appropriate to repair the elevators if we need additional parking and if that garage could serve that function?
Through the chair, I'm not sure if Blair could answer this better, but I believe when Mr. Jones was here, he did do a study on the parking garage to determine that there's additional floors that can be added. And it would just mean expanding the elevator shaft itself. The elevator and the equipment could still be reused.
That answers my query. That's very encouraging. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor DeGay. Any further comments or questions on the recommendation in front of us? Moved by Councillor Reel. We'll take a vote. And that is carried. We have no notice of motion this evening. Other business? No other business? All right. Motion to adjourn. Councillor LaChica will take a vote. And that is carried. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you Wednesday at 6 p.m. Have a good evening.
Good night.
Thank you, Chair.